That's my spiel. Without further ado, welcome Mike.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I would prefer not using the microphone, but I have a feeling I will not be heard if I don't. Anyway, tonight's topic, Lillian and Frank Gilbreth. I don't think there are very many people who do not know that they were famous people who came from Montclair. There's a bit of a disclaimer here. I outright stole some slides from somebody else's PowerPoint presentation. I stole about 4 or 5 of them, so as we go through the next part. Frank was involved in the construction business. He got his start. He was a brick carrier, or a hod carrier as they called. And he was looking at the master bricklayer that he was supposed to be carrying the bricks for, and he started saying, well, you know, you're doing this all wrong. You could do this much better. This is a brand new, helper who just started, and he's talking to this master bricklayer and saying, you can do this much better. And of course, the bricklayer wasn't too happy about it. Anyway, Frank was right. He figured out a way to make it easier to work faster. Lillian, on the other hand, was much more quiet. She was not as boisterous as Frank. She was not as outgoing as Frank, but she was very serious and quite an accomplished lady. I have to give you a warning. This is the Surgeon General's warning. If you read a book, any book, about Lilian Gilbreth, you are going to come away feeling like an underachiever. A remarkable woman. She lived in Oakland, California. Her family was the Moeller family. They lived in California, in Oakland. They would not let her go away to college, so she went to a local college, the University of California in Berkeley, where she was the class valedictorian. She got her degree, she got her master's degree, and she went through all the work of writing and defending a dissertation. But when it came time to grant her doctorate, she had moved away from California. She did not meet the residency requirements, and they did not give it to her. She had moved east. She married Frank. So, no problem. She went to Brown University and got another doctorate. When I tell you that you're going to feel like an underachiever standing next to Lillian, I'm not kidding. So she got 2 doctorates. And this is a little bit about Frank, about how he figured out how to do literally lay twice as many bricks as the most professional master bricklayers. He started his own construction company. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the bricklaying stuff. This, by the way, this slide is not a centerfold from Playgirl magazine. He liked to film the things that he was studying, and that helped him to figure out the best way to do things. And you can see the stopwatch there. This is filming him filming his workers while they were laying brick, and he was trying to figure out the best way to do it. He designed a scaffold, and there's going to be a couple of slides showing the scaffold. The scaffold allowed the bricks to be put at a lower level, or higher level, for the bricklayer. Before, the bricklayers used to have to bend over, go through a pile of bricks, look to see which was the best side, and then take it, come up, and put it in place. Well, Frank figured out, see that middle, there's a middle bench, put the bricks, lay them out with the best side already up, at a level where the bricklayer doesn't have to bend over. He can pick up the brick with one hand, he can pick up the trowel with the other hand, and he can do the work much faster. Now, of course, this made the work much easier for the bricklayers. It made the work much harder for the brick carriers who had to lay out those piles of bricks. But Frank wanted to make work easy for everybody who worked for him. So in his construction company, he was one of the first to use cement mixers. That would have been a job for the brick carrier to mix the cement. He used mechanical cement mixers. So he made everybody in his company very efficient. He was a very successful contractor. This is a building he built in record time in MIT. I'm not exactly sure how quickly it was built, but it was built much faster than anybody expected it to be built. He grew his business. He came to have offices in Boston, in New York, and he owned a couple of cars and a yacht. That was before he was married. He broke everything down into units. And he would study a process. He would study people while they were working, break it down into units. These are the symbols of the units. And his job was try to figure out how to get the job done with the least amount of units. When he started with that master bricklayer, the master bricklayer used 18 of these units to lay one brick. He got it down to 4. He called it these units Thurbligs, which is Gilbreth sort of spelt backwards and adding an S. And then, of course, once again, Lillian, 2 doctorates, 28 honorary doctorates. She wrote dozens or co-wrote dozens of books. She received the Hoover Medal, which is an engineering award offered by 5 separate engineering associations, and they don't award it every year. They only award it when it's deserved. It is a rarefied company that she was with, and she was in that company, once again, an amazing woman. She achieved many things, she accomplished many things. I think what most of us are going to remember is the kitchen work triangle. The sink, the refrigerator, and the stove should all be within 15 feet of each other, thereby making it more efficient to cook. Probably the least of her achievements, but the one that we remember her for. And they issued a stamp in her honor. I don't know, she lived until 1972. I don't know if anybody of you ever met her. This is a picture of her later in life. Nobody met her? Did anybody go to school with the kids or the grandkids? Yeah, okay.
When did they all graduate?
What's that?
When did they graduate? My father grew up in Montclair. You might have.
They would have all been out of school by the 40s. By the 40s. Another picture of her later on in life. However, this is not a talk about Lillian and Frank. This is going to be a talk about the kids. When they were first married, Lillian and Frank lived in Boston. They moved to New York. Anne was the eldest. She was born in New York. Around 1911, they moved to Plainfield. This is the house that they lived in Plainfield. Then they moved to Rhode Island. At the point, they had 8 kids. There was a child who had died. She was born and died when she was 5, Mary. About late in 1916 or about 1917, I'm not exactly sure when they moved to Montclair. And this is a picture of their house in Montclair. No, it isn't. This is the house where the movie was filmed on the MGM back lot. This was the film filmed here on the NJ Merrill back lot, and this is the same house being used in the film Meet Me in St. Louis. This was their house, 68 Eagle Rock Way in Montclair. The house is not there now. She tore it down in 1941. This is another view of the house. The Carriage House, however, is still there. The lots have changed, so the Carriage House is now behind 108 Eagle Rock Way. My telephoto lens wasn't working so hot that day, and this is private property, so I couldn't just go up and take a picture of the Carriage House. The Carriage House has recently been renovated and restored to what it was originally like. The Carriage House is where Frank Sr. had his photo lab. And this is their car, a 1914 Pierce Arrow, and they called it Foolish Carriage because Frank thought it would be foolish to have so many children in a car like this. And the kids in the back, there on the rumble seat, often felt like they were going to fall out the back. From what I read both, recently I read both Cheaper by the Dozen and Bells on Their Toes, and from what I got the impression that they had only had one car, because Frank was constantly having to go back out in the garage and smack this thing and, with every ounce of effort, get it going. If you'll notice in this picture, it is a left-hand drive, like the cars in England. And the stories, both Cheaper by the Dozen and Bells on Their Toes, make fun of the fact that he had to have lookouts. Lillian, if she was up front, had to look out, if he was going to pass a car. She had to look behind and look in front. Now here's the same car, I think, but notice the steering wheel is now on the left. However, if you look at this picture, they're all staring absolutely straight ahead. I think this was a posed picture in a very similar car. That's what I think. Anyway, here's another posed picture. As I said, Mary died. Actually, Lillian went through the birth process 13 times. One of the kids was stillborn and didn't live. There were never 12 kids at any single time because Mary died before the younger kids were born. But they always felt her presence. They always felt like they were 12. The book, Cheaper by the Dozen, doesn't really tackle this. Bells on Their Toes, there is a footnote that admits that there was only 11 kids at any given time. Here's another picture of them. That's Lillian with all the kids except Anne. The next picture, I apologize for the quality. It's the only one I could find. They had a summer house on Nantucket Island called The Shoe. And Frank named it The Shoe because he looked at his wife and all their kids and it reminded him of the old woman who lived in a shoe. If you look carefully, even at this lousy picture, you're going to see that there are two small, what appear to be lighthouses, and that is what they are. Frank had those moved. They were near his estate, and he bought them from the state of Massachusetts and had them brought into his estate. Nantucket is an island. They have a main lighthouse, and neither one of these is the main lighthouses. They called them bug lights. Don't know why that they called them bug lights. They were progressively taller, and so that in a deep fog, a ship captain who was still far from shore in the fog could see that the lights were getting higher and would know which one was actually the entrance to the port. In a deep fog, Nantucket, it's an island. He could follow the water. He could follow it the wrong way, away from the entrance to the harbor. Anyway, these are two of the bug lights that Frank had moved to his summer home. This is the picture of all of them in front of one of the bug lights. Now we're going to talk about Anne. She was the oldest. She was the one who had the most responsibilities. She graduated from the University of Michigan. I want you to notice, and you probably will notice, every single one of the kids graduated from college. That was very unusual for the time. My father, same generation, didn't finish college. He started it, but he didn't finish. And my mother went to a fashion school. So it would have been very unusual, but in the Gilbreth family, every single child graduated from college. As I said, she was always left in charge when the parents were away. When they were younger, Frank's mom or some of the aunts would come and help out. And they always had adult servants. She married Dr. Robert Barney. They called him Dr. Bob, and the kids loved him. She had had girlfriends. She had had boyfriends before, and the kids didn't like them, and would often create a lot of mischief to drive the boyfriends crazy. But they all fell in love with Dr. Bob. So they lived in Palo Alto, and they had 3 children. She died in 1987. I might as well tell you now, none of the children are still alive. They have all passed on. There are, of course, grandchildren, and I believe Molly said that Peter is going to be here, was it next week?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
This is Mary. She was born in 1906 and unfortunately died from diphtheria in 1912. Ernestine. She was born in 1908 and graduated from Smith College. If you have seen the movie or read the book, you know that the Gilbreth system was to try and make everybody efficient, including the kids, and the house was actually kind of a lab where the Gilbreths would try out their ideas. When Frank Sr. was working for the Remington Company, he brought home a great big white typewriter that they called Moby Dick, and it turns out that Ernestine learned how to touch type better and faster than any of the other kids, even when they put covers on the letters. So she knew by feel how to type. She was the one that Tom, and he was the manservant, called the princess. However, I got a little bit confused because in some places in Cheaper, Bells on Their Toes, he refers to her as the Duchess. Tom was Irish. The Duchess. The point is, Ernestine and Tom had kind of a feud going on. When she was young, she gave Tom a picture of herself, and she was very proud of that. Tom promptly went into the pantry and posted the picture in the pantry and told Ernestine that now he could scare the rats away. So, they had kind of a feud going. So when Tom called her the princess or the duchess, he wasn't always, it wasn't always with full loving heart. However, after their father had died, Ernestine was a little bit older. She was in her teens, and she was the one who was supposed to help Tom learn how to cook. Tom had been the handyman, and they had a cook, Mrs. Cunningham. After their father died, money got tight. They had to let somebody go. So they let the cook go, and they kept Tom, the manservant, and hoped that he could cook. And apparently he was not a very good cook. So it was Ernestine's job to make him a better cook. She married Charles Carey. They had 2 children. They lived in New York City first, where she was a shopper for Macy's. They moved to Long Island, and she was a trustee of the Manhasset Public Library. She was very active in an anti-censorship group called the Right to Read, and this would probably have been around the 1950s, the McCarthy era. The family moved to Arizona. Late in her life, Lillian, the mother, moved to Arizona to live with Ernestine and her family. After that, Ernestine moved to California. But of course, the reason why we know her is she was the co-author of these 2 fabulous books that we've been discussing for weeks. Cheaper by the Dozen and Bells on Their Toes. I'd like you to realize that bells is spelt improperly here. It's not spelled improperly. It's not spelled like ring, ring, ring bells. It's bells, young ladies. So the saying came from a line in the book where if the girls wanted rings on their fingers, they would have to be bells on their toes. Here's Cheaper by the Dozen in French and in German. It is a very popular book. It has been published, republished, published again. And here it is in Finnish, and I defy anybody to pronounce that. Now, any of you who have been with me or to any of my other presentations know that my presentations are nothing if I don't throw in at least 1 or 2 tangents that have little to do with the subject. Well, here is tangent number 1. Cheaper by the Dozen and Bells on Their Toes, and most of the other books written by Ernestine and Frank were published by the T.Y. Cowell Publishing Company. Thomas Y. Crowell, lived in Montclair too. He lived at 512 Park Street. Here are some of the other books that Ernestine wrote. Giddy Moment is about falling in love in the 60s. Apparently lipstick has a lot to do with it. Rings Around Us was a story she wrote about her married life in the Carey family. Jumping Jupiter was about her years in Macy's, in a bustling, huge department store. She also wrote a couple of other books that were not published, a medical thriller, Razzle Dazzle, and she passed away in 2006. Towards the end of the career, she stopped writing and she started speaking. And she would go around the country talking about her family and her experiences. Every year that a baby was born, Frank, Sr., Papa, would come out and say, "Hey, you want to see the newest model?" Martha was the newest model in 1909. She graduated from Rutgers. She married Richard E. Talman. Now, you'll notice that Richard E. Talman is in bold print. I would like you just to remember that name just for a couple minutes. We'll talk about it later. He worked in Washington State in the lumber business, so they moved to Washington. They had 4 children, and she died in 1968. She was the best at mental math. One of the things that Frank and Lillian tried to teach their kids to do well was to multiply double-digit numbers, and they worked out a system. And Martha was the best at figuring out those large multiplication problems. She was also extremely good at keeping the budget. And if you read Bells on Their Toes, you'll find out that she was given $600 to bring the family to Nantucket that summer, and she brought the whole project in for $300. Now, she was a budget person. She pinched every penny. She was also in charge of packing for the trip to Nantucket. And being very efficient like her parents, she made lists. And every child had to present themselves and check off every item on the list. She forgot to pack her own stuff.
She forgot to pack her own thing.
So, she had packed her mother's clothes. I should tell you, her mother was away in Europe. Frank had just died. He had made a commitment to speak in Europe at some engineering conferences. Lillian decided to honor his commitment. The children, Anne was now old enough. They had Tom, the servant. Anne and Ernestine and Martha were now old enough that they could really take care of the kids. So she left them. She went to Europe. The mother went to Europe. They kept in touch with her. And when she came back from Europe, she was supposed to stop in Montclair and pick up Martha's bathing suit. Martha's, scrummaged up enough clothes to get by. She was supposed to come with Martha's bathing suit. However, something happened, and Lillian, the mother, could not get the bathing suit. So she stopped at a department store and bought Martha a brand new bathing suit. And this is Martha's joy at having this brand new bathing suit. Now, you will see the boys were brought berets. And they were not so happy. They didn't think those were wonderful gifts at all. And if you look really closely in the background, you will see the elder girls with French bonnets, French hats. And they weren't really happy with those either. But the mother had a surprise. After everybody voiced their discontent, she handed at least the girls their own bathing suits. And that made everybody happy. You know what? There was the dedication in Bells on Their Toes. I love this. The dedication is to father, who had 12 children, and to mother, who had 12 only children. Yeah. FrankGilbreth Jr., he was the co-author of Cheaper by the Dozen and Bells on Their Toes. He graduated from the University of Michigan. He was married twice, total of 3 children. He was the one who embarrassed Ernestine's self-absorbed and very short-term boyfriend. His name was Al Lynch, and Frank dressed up like a girl and broke in on him while he was in the tub. He served in the Navy in the South Pacific. He became a lieutenant commander. He was awarded 2 Air Medals and a Bronze Star, so I bet you he saw some service. He came back, he got married, and he moved to South Carolina, but he kept the home in Nantucket. Nantucket loomed large in the Gilbreth life. They kept going back there, and quite a few of the children bought homes there. He kept the original home, and then quite a few of the other children built homes there as well. He wrote a long-running column for the Post and Courier in Charleston, calling it Doing the Charleston, and he called himself Ashley Cooper. Charleston is where the Ashley Rivers and Cooper Rivers come together. He was also a co-editor of the paper. Again, like I said, he was the co-author of Cheaper by the Dozen and Bells on Their Toes. In French, Bells on Their Toes becomes Ces filles à marier, or 6 Young Ladies for Marrying. He also wrote Time Out for Happiness. This was a little more serious look at the Gilbreth parents and the Gilbreth kids. It involved a great deal more about their time and motion study theories and their business life. It wasn't quite as light and fluffy as Cheaper by the Dozen or Bells on the Toes. he wrote several books about Nantucket. I told you Nantucket played a very important role in the Gilbreth life. And this is Hell's Angels, which was a book about the Roaring Twenties. In Bells, there's a scene where Frank is driving their beat-up old Model T without a roof to Washington. Lillian, the mom, had met Lou Hoover, who was high up in the Girl Scout organization, and Lou asked Gillian to join her. So she was on the National Girl Scout staff. Again, just another one of the things that she did. Anyway, they drove to Washington, D.C. in the rain to meet Herbert Hoover. When they got to Washington, they were drenched. Their clothes were absolutely soaked. Remember, this Model T didn't have a roof. So Mother, being the practical one, got out an iron in her hotel room, and she started ironing everybody's clothes to dry them out. She left the iron on Frank's suit on a little bit too long. To be honest, Frank had just gone to college, and he bought a collegiate suit, which would have been appropriate for the 1930s. Wide lapels, double-breasted vest with lapels, cuffs, 28-inch cuffs, in the color, well, they couldn't figure out what the color was. It was a color in between tan and yellow. Now, there was a tradition in the Gilbreth family that you always handed your clothes down to the next person. The younger brothers didn't want Frank's suit. So maybe Mom left the iron on his suit just a little too long for a reason. They went out immediately, they got another suit, and they went to meet Herbert Hoover. This is Frank later in life, who wrote another book of Whales and Women about Nantucket, and I'm a Lucky Guy, which was about his life in the service, and apparently he didn't get along with his CO so well. William, the newest model in 1912, graduated from Purdue. He was also in the Navy. 5 of the Gilbreth boys served in World War II. Frank Sr. served in World War I, even though he was past draft age. He actually wrote a letter to the War Department and said, "Here I am, take me." They made him a major. And then they put him in charge of, believe it or not, efficiency. Things like how fast can you take a weapon apart and reassemble it. He studied medical surgery, and that's where he came up with the idea that the nurses should hand the doctor's instruments. Before that, the doctor would be in the middle of surgery, would go around the patient, grab a tool from the table, come back, and continue. Being an efficiency expert, Frank Sr. said, "Hey, let the nurse be a caddy. Just call out the name of the appropriate instrument and the nurse will hand it to you." And it sped up operations enormously. So the kids, kind of in the same tradition, they all but one served in World War II. Bill became an engineer. He married Jean Irvin, and they lived in Maryland and had 2 kids. He was the one who suggested the dog at the second family council. Now, if you read the books, you'll know that every Sunday they had a family council. Frank Sr. had set it up so that this is how he could dole out jobs and things like that. But the second family council, the kids and probably Mom, ganged up on Frank Sr. and said, well, we have to have parliamentary procedure. And Bill was the one who suggested that they get a dog. They actually had saved money on, I forget what they did. They saved money on something. So Bill then said, well, let's use that money to get a dog. The rug, exactly, the rug. And Bill suggested, let's get a dog. And this was kind of a setup. And of course, they backed their father into a corner. Well, we have to have a family vote on it. And it was all of the kids and Mom against Dad, who had no intention of getting a dog. He was the mischief maker. Yeah, doesn't he? He was the one who blasted the horn when Frank Sr. was under the hood of Foolish Carriage. Now, Frank liked to play a joke on his kids. He would bring the car out, open the hood, and tell his kids, well, look around, take a look at the engine and stuff inside. And then while they were under the hood, he would blast the horn. They would be startled, and he would yell, did you see the birdies? Well, Bill, one time on a trip, the car broke down. Now we're talking about a superheated engine. Dad jumps out, tries to fix things. You know, now the engine is hot, and Bill jumps over to the steering wheel and blasts the horn. And of course, Dad now jumps up, he smashes his head on the hood, and he burns his wrist on the engine. And he was very angry but see, that was the thing about Frank. He could laugh at himself. When he realized what the situation was, he realized that he had done it to the kids, so the kids could do it to him. This became one of their favorite stories. They went west to visit Lillian's parents. What's that? Yeah. And Bill became kind of pet of their Chinese chef. And the Chinese chef always threatened to throw Bill in the oven. But of course never meant to do it, never actually did it. Bill, being a kid, not realizing the difference between joking around and reality, one time when the chef was actually poking around in the oven, comes up behind him and pushes him into the oven. Aunt Anne was one of Frank Sr.'s sisters. Bill climbed under the table and kept thumping her. And they would then move back. She would lift up the tablecloth, nothing there. She said, you've got a dog. She looked at the kids accusingly, you've got a dog. He'd sneak up again, thump her again. You've got to have a dog. And the kids would all with very angelic faces, no, Aunt Anne, we don't have a dog. Then he licks her. And he jumps back. He jumps back again. She lifts up the tablecloth. She can't see him. And she was a plump woman, so she wasn't about to get down on her hands and knees and look under the table. Well, the next time, she was ready for him. So he comes up. She dangles her hand in between her knees. Bill, being a kid, couldn't resist. He comes up to lick her again, and she grabs him by the hair. Got you! He was the one who tricked Tom into drinking the glass of orange juice with the castor oil. Tom had made a deal with Bill that Tom would drink whatever glass of orange juice. This is, by the way, they all had come down with the measles. And Tom thought the castor oil was going to somehow help them with the measles. So he gave them all glasses of orange juice mixed with castor oil. He makes a deal with Bill. I'll drink whichever one you don't drink. He had put vegetable oil in one of the glasses, so you could see the vegetable oil floating on the top. The other one, he had carefully mixed the castor oil into the orange juice, and Bill figured out the ruse and forced Tom to drink the one with the castor oil. Anyway, Bill married Jane Irvin, and they moved to Bloomfield when they were first married, and this is a house where they lived. This was 1941. Lillian, this was after Frank had died in 1924. Tom died in 1940. Most of the kids had moved away at this point. Lillian had the house knocked down, and she moved to this house in Bloomfield. Okay, the 1940 model, Lilian Gilbreth. I could not find a picture of her as an adult. She graduated from Smith. She married Donald Dodge Johnson, who was also from Montclair, and they had 2 children. This is one of the stories that I love the most in both of those books. She was one of the things that Frank would have the kids do was have them bid on jobs for money. And of course the job would go to the lowest bidder, because that's the way life works in business. She bid 47 cents to paint the back fence, and this is when she was about 6 or 7. She wanted a pair of roller skates. It took her 10 days to paint this fence. It wasn't a very big fence, but she was 7. The other kids kept pleading with Dad, "Look, Dad, let us help her. She's just a young kid. Let us help her." Dad said, no, she bid 47 cents. That's what she bid. She contracted to do the job. That's what she has to do. 10 days, she finally finishes. Now the kids are protesting, give her more than 47 cents. Come on, Dad. No. She bid 47 cents. That's what the contract says. That's what we're going to give her. So she comes up. She collects her 47 cents. She's crying. Dad, I'm sorry it took so long to do this fence. And Dad says, well, that's all right. Why don't you go up to bed now? Under the pillow was the brand new pair of roller skates. That kind of shows to me what kind of parents Frank and Lillian were. We talked about her husband. He was a safety engineer with DuPont. He later took over his father's textile business. They moved to Verona, but came back to live in Montclair. After living in Montclair, they retired to Delaware. That's a very hard word to say. I've only been speaking English 68 years. They were married for 65 years, and this is their home in Montclair at 188 Summit Avenue. When they were in Montclair, that's where they lived. She died in 2008. Fred, born in 1916, he graduated from Brown University. He was also in the service during World War II. He was a second lieutenant in the 8th Army Corps. He is the one who accidentally let the canaries fly away on the ferry to Nantucket. Now, it was an accident. Dad hated those canaries. They were Martha's canaries, and Martha brought them with them, the family, everywhere they went. Dad hated the canaries. He thought they were smelly. He thought they were dirty. When they flew away, he was delighted. Great, we've finally gotten rid of these stupid canaries. They happened to be boarding a ferry to go out to the Nantucket Island. The captain, when he sees the little boy crying, Fred, says, "What's the matter, son?" And Fred explains, the canaries flew away. The captain stops the ship, sends the crew out, go and retrieve those canaries. They couldn't. After a couple of hours, they couldn't. So Dad, who is now enjoying this. He loves it. They got rid of those stupid canaries. He tells Martha, look, throw away the cage. They get to Nantucket, and the next day, the postman comes up with a packet that has a cardboard box with little holes in it. The crew found the canaries. His mother, they went to Nishawan school, most of them, and his mother gave a talk. And that day, the talk was about the most efficient way to soap yourselves when you're taking a bath. And if you've ever seen the movie, that's a big scene in the movie with the dad explaining the most efficient way to cover yourself with soap and then rinse it off. And the mother spoke about that at Nishawan. Well, the class bully caught up with Fred afterwards and forced him to eat soap until Lillian came up from behind and whacked the guy with the roller skate. Probably the same roller skate that she had saved up for him. Fred became an engineer for IBM, and he married Jessie Tallman. Now, I remember I asked you to remember that name. She was Richard's sister. They lived in Larchmont, which is near his work, and they had 3 kids. He died in 2015, and he was the last of the kids to pass away. Dan graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. He was a lieutenant in the Navy. He worked for his father-in-law for a while, and then he started his own business, BobGilbreth Importing Company, and they imported electronic items, mostly from Japan. Their offices in Montclair were in Upper Montclair. They were in the building that some of us remember as the women's division of the Olympic shop, and is now Williams-Sonoma. That's where Dan's offices were. They did move away. They finally moved to West Caldwell. Dan stayed in Montclair for most of his life. Very late in life, they moved to West Caldwell too. He was the president of the Montclair Rotary, and he was a deacon at First Congregational. And his story, this is in Bells, was he gave everybody great big ugly ashtrays for Christmas, and they were all wrapped the same, so everybody knew they were going to get a big ugly ashtray, and they were not smokers. But, Dan's a kid. This is where he lived in Montclair, up on Highland Avenue. As I said, his company moved to West Caldwell, and his son, David, took over after he retired. He, like many of the Gilbreths, loved Nantucket, and they bought a house there. He loved the bluefish, and he would always catch too many. And he would bring the excess to a senior citizen's home on Nantucket. He died in 2006. Here is Jack. He was a master sergeant in the Marines during World War II, and I'll bet you he saw some action. He became an engineer. When he was very young, he produced a massive burp and tried to blame it on the guest. When they were sitting at the dinner table, if anybody burped or whatever, Frank Sr. would look over and said, "We don't need no organ recitals here." Sir, he would say, "We don't need any organ recitals here." Well, Jack, when he's a kid, he burped. He turned to one of their guests and said, "We don't need no organ recitals here," which, of course, embarrassed the heck out of his parents. He was sent to the kitchen sobbing to eat the rest of his dinner. Eventually, they relented and came and brought him back and reunified him with the family. This is where he married Dorothy. They had 3 kids. They lived in Montclair, and this was where they lived. They lived at 215 Fernwood Avenue. Now we have Bob. He was born on Nantucket Island. He got his undergraduate degree at the University of North Carolina and got a master's degree in education. He was the one, when he was a kid, he jumped on Anne's wedding train as she was processing up the aisle to be married. In one of the final chapters on Bells on Their Toes, his baby was being christened, and his squirmy baby and his reactions reminded everybody of Frank Sr. at christenings. Frank did not attend church. Frank Sr., that is, did not attend church regularly. He let Lily, as he called his wife Lillian, take the kids to church and to Sunday school while he sat in the car reading the New York Times. Their church, I think we all know it, it's not very far from here, First Congregational. Yeah. Bob married Barbara Filler, and they had 2 kids. They lived in New Hampshire. He was a principal, a teacher. He was elected to the New Hampshire state legislature. In the summers, he ran a B&B on Nantucket called the Anchor Inn. And the book, Inside, and you'll notice now that it's INNSIDE, Nantucket, was a book about all their adventures and misadventures setting up that B&B. And he passed away in 2007. Final child, Jane. She was also born on Nantucket. She met her future husband at Montclair High School. She graduated from the University of Michigan. She was the one who the boys taught how to flounce when she sat down. I'm not exactly sure what that means. I think it has something to do with the way you're supposed to throw your dress, your skirt, when you sit down. Is that flouncing? Yeah. I read it, but I wasn't exactly sure what it was about. They taught her how to very cleanly and neatly turn and face somebody who's trying to break in while you're at a dance. So you would leave the other person very gracefully and then exchange partners. And one time when one of the kids, Ned Morris, tried to kiss her, she slapped his face. They moved to California. He was a salesman, and they opened up a small restaurant together. He got his teaching credentials, and then he spent many years at the Davenport school system. They retired to Washington, so they lived in Washington as well as her sister. She passed away in 2006. Now, the characters in the book, were they real or they were not real? They were all real people, but they didn't always go by their real names. They were sometimes given fake names for the books. Tom, the handyman and cook, yes, that was his real name. His real name was Tom Greaves. Mrs. Cunningham, the cook, that was her real name, and her name was Agnes Cunningham. The kids just called her Mrs. Cunningham. The energetic colored woman who came and helped out after Tom died, well, I'm a little bit ashamed that they did not even try to come up with a name for her. That is not a real name, of course. Her real name was Rebecca Quinns, and she lived in Montclair. Mrs. Bruce, I heard you guys talking about the Planned Parenthood person who came to Montclair. Great story. This person came looking for someone who'd help her set up a chapter in Montclair. And somebody with a little bit of mischief in their heart sent her to Mrs. Bruce, who had 8 kids. And when this lady found out that she had 8 kids, she said, well, maybe you're not the best candidate for Planned Parenthood. I'm not even sure that it was Planned Parenthood. It was some organization. And so Mrs. Bruce in the same spirit that got, sent this lady to her in the first place, said, well, you should meet my friend Lilian Gilbreth. She's got a great big house, and she loves to organize things, and she would love to set up a chapter. Anyway, that was not her real name, but her real name was Catherine Hughes. I got that by going through the census forms and looking for somebody that had 8 kids, and son of a gun. I found her. They lived on South Fullerton. Dr. Burton, who appears in both of the books, and was the one who, when Dad decided it was going to be more efficient to have all of them have their tonsils out at the same time, Dr. Burton took all of their tonsils out, and it was supposed to be filmed.
Right.
It was supposed to be filmed. As I said, he loved filming his studies so he could figure out the best way to do things in the future. Well, there was no doctor called Dr. Burton in town. There was a Dr. Butler. Maybe that was the same person. Mrs. Bilsop, the principal at Nishawane, that was not her real name. Her real name was Clara Gilnack. There was not enough clues in the books for me to identify boyfriends and girlfriends. But there was nobody named Libby Holton who lived in Montclair. There was nobody named Joe Scales who lived in Montclair. There was nobody named Ned Morris or Mr. Conway. Mr. Cogan was the photographer who was supposed to film the tonsils operations. He forgot to put film in the camera. Well, that wasn't his real name either. There was nobody in Montclair with that name anyway. Stenographer, Miss Butler, she doesn't appear much in the book. She just appears quite briefly in Bells on Their Toes. There was a Nellie Butler, who was a stenographer who lived in Montclair. Maybe that was a real person. Lillian lived until 1972. As I told you before, she moved to Bloomfield in 1941. She moved back to Montclair in 1945, and she lived here. She lived that is on the Crescent. And here is a family tree. I borrowed these slides too. And you'll notice my cleverly evolving arrow to point to Peter, who is John's son. Final slide, the next generation. That was Dan's son, David. He's sitting down with the koala bear, and Bill's daughter, Lillian, with a koala that Grandma brought back from a trip to Australia. Questions? Thank you. Thank you all for coming.